Hello everybody. So I'm going to try my best to answer some of the, no, well, I'm going to try my best to answer all the questions that I received from you, and let's see how that works. So I'm going to just start with Matthias, who is asking which are the challenges for current composers in, I'm not sure about the English here, in which device should the music be written? I guess using which devices, maybe, which is a question that is totally not possible to answer, I think. The challenges, of course, is to try to renew the way of composing, getting more into, try to find new ways, new original ways of expressing electroacoustic music, if that's what you want to do. And exactly how to do that, I'm not able to tell you. There's a lot of challenges, reaching to the audience, etc. And what devices to use. I mean, if you want to generalize things, most of the time it's a computer, and then it's about your choice of software, which depends on what kind of music you want to do. And so that is also difficult to give a direct answer to. There is no direct way of saying you should use this or you should use that. It all comes down to what you want to do with your music, and what kind of music, and how you prefer to work in your own personal way. So second question is, how do you think the spatialization okay, how do you think about spatialization in your works? That depends. If I work earlier, I was like most other composers, doing everything in stereo, and then the spatialization in that sense is rather limited, but it's more like working with different fields, like a near field and a mid field and a background maybe, or something like that, just to create a sense of depth and the movement in not just right and left, but also foreground, background movements. Of course, nowadays I usually work with multi-channel mixes, and I'm sorry, I have a little problem with my lens. And then I'm using my own software that I developed for doing the spatialization, and actually you can get it on my website. It's called Hyperspace. So also, depending on what kind of material, sound material, what is the idea behind the composition and stuff like that, I would, compose the spatial elements differently. So that is like really not just from one piece to another, but also from one kind of sound material or one sequence of the piece to another. So it will vary all the time. I would have to sort of show my pieces in a real environment to be able to give a more proper explanation to how I think. Then number 3, Matthias asked, why do you think that music is a hidden object? Well, Matthias, I think you didn't quite get the point there. The hidden objects in this piece is actually the sound objects that I'm using, so that I thought I'd explain that one pretty clearly. So it's not the music that is hidden, even though in the end you have this sentence that the music is in itself an enigma, and or the consequence of all these hidden objects that I use is actually the answer to that enigma is the music, because I think music is enigmatic and magic and strange, and I don't think I will ever understand music, how it works. I mean, I just know it works. Sometimes it works really good, other times it works in a terrible fashion. But exactly why music works well is like, yeah, it's a mystery to me. Even though, I mean, I am still teaching and I'm trying to explain at least the way I understand that things work together, but it's not the full solution to all the mysteries about music. Number 5, so in Growl, how do you organize the rhythm for the different phonemas? That's a new word. Should I take that as phonemes of the voices or phenomens? I'm not really sure. If we just stick to the voices, then it's like in most of this kind of music that I'm playing with, it's rather straightforward, so it goes together with the lyrics. They sort of decide, but it's basically it's a 4 on the floor beat, and so there's nothing specific to organization like that. It's just standard rhythmic phrases. Then in other situations where it goes more towards this electroacoustic kind of making the music, then it's a lot of improvisation in the way that I created things, and then I put things together, and so I try to keep the 4/4 thing under the surface all the time. So you have this kind of rhythmic drive, even though it's combined in ways with other sound that it's not so obvious as it is like in the beginning. But so all the pieces like mainly structured around 4/4, 16s, and not too complicated things. But because of the nature of it and the movements of certain things connecting to other things, it can give an impression of being a little bit more complex than it actually is. How important are glissandos in your works? Yeah, well, I have used them and I'm still using them. Maybe less today. The reason why there is this kind of glissando feeling in the beginning of Growl, for instance, is that it's just a scream from one of the singers, and so it's just transposed in several layers, and time stretched. No, it's not time stretched. It's basically just transposed, and so it gets, as the pitch rises, it gets faster and faster, of course. And so the glissando is sort of, in that case, it's sort of built into in the way he screams. That's why you get it. And there are other glissandos, and they are just because the singers are doing the glissandos. I didn't choose that. That was more of, I asked them to do some, growling improvisation stuff. And it came out like it came out, and I just picked some of it. But otherwise, like, there's glissandis in my pieces a lot. So yeah, it's a standard thing, I guess, not just in my music. Glissandis has been around for a very long time as a mean of transporting things from one pitch level to another, and you can also do transformation processing during that movement. So it's efficient, and sometimes maybe it's a little bit too much of it here and there, but I still like to use it sometimes. Let's see, the reverberation appears like structuring the form. How do you work with it? In a dramatic way, or maybe like a process for unify the materials? Well, reverberation, like I said, is can be used in many ways. Like you say, it can be a dramatic effect, like you do this kind of reverse reverb thing to build transitions and put things together like that. But it's also a way of working with the spatial content of things to broaden or deepen the space that you work in. So reverb is very useful, and everybody knows that, because it's very plastic and you can use it in many ways. Yeah, so I would say it's both in a dramatic way and a process of of unifying things and creating spatial relations. That's how I use it. Then we go to Miguel, who is asking, do you tell stories in your works? Sometimes, yes, I do. I mean, I think of music, or I think of sound objects rather. Sometimes I think of them as actors on a stage, like in a theater play or maybe in a film or something. So each of these sound objects represent some kind of identity in themselves, like they have some kind of personality or whatever. And then it's just to play them out towards each other and build and deepen the relations between them, just like you do in any good theater play. And also to gradually over time change these relations to create new dramatic situations and so on and so forth. So in a sense, yes, I'm telling a story like that, although it's kind of a very abstract story. Sometimes my pieces are, or quite often in fact, have some kind of conceptual idea, which, like for instance, I can mention this piece called Vie Mecanique. It has some kind of storyline because it's about a big machine, and the machine is born and it grows and becomes huge, and then it dies and it goes to machine heaven where it stays for a while, and then it's sort of reborn, reincarnated into a different machine, in this kind of techno machine. So that's kind of a superficial story, you could say. That was more like for myself to keep some line in the piece, I guess. Nico is asking, what questions do you usually ask yourself in the creative process? Yeah, I guess the first and most important question I ask myself every time I try or I think of doing a piece is why. Why should I do this piece? Is there any reason? Should I do it because I don't want to do music just to do music? That is not interesting to me. So I need to have some solid kind of idea or concept. Otherwise, the answer to the question why would be I don't know, and so that would be a bad answer for me, and I wouldn't do anything. I don't do many pieces, in fact. I haven't done so many pieces over the year, and that is because I need to have a good answer for this question, why should I do a piece? During the process, I guess it's the same questions that most composers ask themselves, like how should I progress from this point to this point, and how should I choose a certain formal development idea, or Should I just go with a more non-linear way of thinking? Should I put this material a little bit more like here or there? Should I combine it? Should I add some? Should I remove stuff? These are all sort of standard questions, I think, that everybody asks themselves, so I'm not special like that. So next question by Nico: what were the initial references or ideas, musical or extra musical, of the shared works, of the two different works? Well, that should be sort of obvious if you just read the comments that you can find on my website, which is parmerud.com. There you can read all the explanation of the basic concepts of both the pieces. So it's easier than, I don't want to talk about that because it's better you go and read. Then we jump to Lucrezia. How do you conceive the formal aspect in both works? Well, the first one is kind of easy because it's based on this simple idea of taking one sound object, creating a riddle that will sort of hint you to what object it is behind all the sounds that you hear for each section of the piece. So it's a really simple formal thing. It's nothing special, but it works quite well, since it's about the conceptual thing and about referring to the history of musique concrète to really work with any kind of sound that you can record from real life objects of any kind. And so partly because it was the first piece I did when I had a commission from TRM in Paris, and so I wanted to make some kind of homage to Pierre Schiffern, who was the portal figure around the ideas and theories of musique concrète. So it sort of gave itself in a very simple fashion. When it came to Growl, then the basic starting point was that I was again, as you can read about on my website, but my son was at the time, he was playing in a metal band, and I had to go and listen, of course, be a good father and all that. Even though I couldn't take too much of it, but I still kind of liked it. It's good, especially this kind of voice technique that the growlers are using. So formal, yeah. Well, there is definitely this aspect of trying to create a really alternative kind of metal inspired music, but with changing the sound set completely, or more or less completely, even though I'm using some guitar sounds and stuff, and some of these classical metal structural things. And so the idea was to begin like that and keep it like an alternate metal thing, and then gradually pulling it over into more related, but still getting away from the obvious metal idiom, and go more and more into bringing some of the sounding material, the qualities of the voices, and because it's all about the voices, but into a more sort of classical electroacoustic environment, and then gradually bringing it back again to the end. Simple form, nothing special. Do you think your conception has changed over the years? Yes, it has. I've been trying. I mean, well, it depends on what you mean over the years, because I've been working for many, many years, and during one period I was really much more into thinking in this more traditional modernistic way of composition. But I started quite early to try to work with merging the musical traditions from different times and different styles, and so I've been working with like medieval music. I've been working with a number of really classical music pieces, like I did in the piece that is called Necropolis, which is like old music that is decomposing and falling to pieces using electroacoustic means. And I've been working with jazz and also relating to other composers like Stockhausen and Growl, for instance. So I've done quite a lot of that. And it was around the time of 2005, I guess, because I had been arguing about, because the electroacoustic music at that point of time, the 80s, 90s, beginning of 2000, and traditionally it was totally void of most of what you would call rhythms or you know, this kind of thing. So I wanted to actually start to work with that, and that's so actually, yeah, La Vie Mecanique is the first piece where I actually use rhythms in a very concrete way, and I've been trying to keep that part over the years as well. So, but otherwise, when it comes to the conception, it depends what you mean by conception, because for me, conception can be like the actual creation of the piece, or it can be the conceptual background, like the idea of doing something. So when you come to the this way of trying to find conceptually interesting ways of working, I don't think I've changed that much. Stylistically, yes, I have changed a bit, but you know, you will recognize me, even though my pieces are sometimes very different or not so closely related to each other, but you will sort of recognize my language that I use when I do things. And even in moments when I try to totally avoid that, like I did, because noise music has been sort of a strong thing in Sweden, at least, and other places as well. So, so I was trying to totally leave my electroacoustic way of thinking and making a piece of noise music that didn't work out, because I wasn't able to do it. It's like playing bad dance music. Well, bad. Playing dance music, if you don't like dance music, you will not play it well. It will sound like everybody will hear that you don't like what you're doing. And so I sort of fell back into my standard language way of doing music. So it's not really easy to break, even when you try to break up your own language and develop something new, totally different, because when you have worked long enough, like I have, then it becomes really a part of the language that you are using is really becoming a large part of your complete identity as a composer. Yeah, so next is Magai. I'm not really sure if I pronounced that well. I'm sorry if I don't. Asking, how do you work the diffusion space in your concept? This is a bit, I'm not really sure if I understand the question correctly. Maybe you mean to ask how I work with diffusion in general terms in concepts. Well, it depends on the material. If I am, first of all, it really depends on the concert space. So in some situations, maybe you have 16 loudspeakers that placed differently from venue to venue. Other times you maybe have more, maybe you have 50 loudspeakers and a huge mixing console, and maybe other times you only have 8. So that changes all the time, and so you have to think for every performance how to do to use the space, and depending on the placement of loudspeakers and what kind of loudspeakers, and because some of them can be very small or big and different, they can have different characteristics and all that. So there's a lot of things to think about doing diffusion. And then, of course, it's also depending on your basic material. Is it a stereo piece or is it a multi-channel piece? If it's a multi-channel piece, maybe it requires a certain specific setup to be replayed properly, and then you just have to make sure that you have this configuration. And if you have enough loudspeakers, and let's say you have an 8-channel piece, but maybe you have 24 channels, 24 loudspeakers, so different. Then you can actually start to play in the space, even though you basically have composed for 8 channels, but you can suddenly start to play maybe with height and distance and stuff like that. So it depends. Do you usually think about the room where the works are going to be premiered when composing? No, that is not really possible to think like that. Well, of course you can think like that, but it doesn't make much sense, because my idea is not that my piece will be played just in one space. It should be hopefully played in many different spaces. So from that point of view, it's no use trying to adapt a piece only for one space, unless it's a sound installation or something. It's going to stay in the same space for a longer period of time. Then of course you can think about the space and see. For instance, if you end up in a space with a lot of reverberation, then it's more about choosing the piece you should play there. Or if it's like really extreme, if you compose something, which I have done at some point for a church space, then of course I have to take into account this reverberation of the space when I compose. So then it makes less sense to have a lot of fast movements and a lot of intensity in terms of information, and you should keep it low information and more spatially oriented sounds that that you can actually hear, because otherwise these small details have a tendency to disappear and just float away in that kind of space. Or if, like I have composed in Karlsruhe, where they have this huge space, which is a combined like a concert space and also like a really, really big studio, where they have 48 channel system. It's like a dome construction thing. But then then I work in the space, and then I compose really with the space. But it can still, if I go to some other place where they have this kind of dome structure thing, it's more a matter of remixing the piece. Maybe another place only have 24 channels, but sort of configured in the same way. So then it's more a matter of shrinking the output, the number of output channels, so it still works more or less the same. And here we have Ezekiel. Hang on. I have to move. Yeah. So he's asking, between Les Objets Obscurs and Growl, more than 20 years passed, and both works are built with very different materials. What would be the main difference and similarities that you find between the two works from the point of view of composition? Well, as you hopefully are aware, technology has changed immensely in 20 years. So when I did Les Objets Obscurs, the software was nothing like what it is today. The computers were absolutely nothing like what they are today. And still at that point of time, I had invested some money in putting these kind of sampler cards in my computer, so I could actually work quite extensively with sampling, which was what I did in that piece most of the time. And so hard disk recording wasn't really, playing directly from a hard disk in a more structured fashion. It did exist, and I had that possibility using Pro Tools, but it was also much more limited than it is today, or even 5 years ago, 6 years ago when I did Growl. So I even had to carry my own Macintosh FX from Sweden to Paris, to GRM, because they didn't have any sampling system in the studio at all. And that was not like carrying, a PowerBook or some other laptop thing. It was huge. It was very heavy. So it was a pain in the ass. But I had to do it because otherwise I couldn't have done what I wanted or needed to do. And at this time, GRM, they had their special computer running actually real-time processing system, which was quite rare at that time, which was called CITER. This software later became the start of GRM tools. So some of the stuff in the GRM tools classic collection is actually more or less exactly how the CITER worked. Just it was a separate computer system, and so you couldn't integrate it in the same way. But I was using that for quite a bit of the sound processing that I did there. So yeah, and but when I did Growl, of course, I had all these super powerful tools at my disposal. So the working process was seriously completely different compared to that of Les Objets Obscurs. More processing power, much more software of various kinds of, granular synthesizers and processors, and a lot of new spectral transformations, and I can go on and on and on. So many things, and also having Macs developed from, only at that point of time, 20 years ago, basically only doing MIDI, until until now, where it can do pretty much anything, including video and stuff. So two totally different situations, I would say. Similarities would be that, yes, well, I was, like I say, I still kept some of my way of or my musical language from even from the time when I did Les Obscurs until when I did Growl, which you notice specifically in the more electroacoustic parts of Growl, that it's still kind of the same thinking going on when you're structuring material and creating connections and this and that. So yeah, there are similarities in the way I work, and most likely the way I think about processing sound. Because when I work, I create a lot of material, and I use just a fragment. In the end, just a very small part of all the sound that I develop in the pre-process of composing the piece. So this I have been doing always, more or less. Well, at least since I had a decent computer where I could actually have space to save different sounds instead of having to record them on analog tape or something like that. So yeah, there are similarities, and but technologically speaking, huge difference. So finally, did your way of listening change during those years, 1991 to 2014? Oh, 2014, my God, it's 7 years ago. Has the relationship you seek to establish between the materials and the acousmatic discourse changed? I think I just sort of answered that question to the best of my abilities. So I hope it's been okay. I'm not so good to speak all the time about my own music, but at least I tried. So looking forward to see you all. Ciao.